Coming up, I'll discuss how Trump upended the Harris campaign and the national media in his inspired part-time job making French fries at a Pennsylvania McDonald's. Newsweek senior editor Josh Hammer joins me. We're going to talk about Israel's effective elimination of the Hamas and Hezbollah leadership and how Kamala Harris is reacting to these developments. Hey, if you're watching on Rumble or YouTube, listening on Apple, Google, or Spotify, please subscribe to my channel. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
America needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
Guys, a couple of brief announcements about the book and film. The book Vindicating Trump is out there. It's available through Amazon and Barnes & Noble. If you don't have your copy yet, this is the time to get it, and you'll really enjoy it. The book goes, even if you've seen the film, the book goes in depth into this stuff, and it makes, I think, a very original argument building on a dark prophecy coming from, of all people, Abraham Lincoln in his Lyceum speech. But it also has a lot of information about Trump, including a window into various sides of Trump that a lot of people have really not seen. The film is now streaming on multiple platforms, and you can watch it on Rumble. In fact, Rumble has a new offering called Rumble Premium. And so if you get Rumble Premium, the movie is included. By the way, if you join my locals channel, dinesh.locals.com, you can become an annual subscriber, and the movie is included. It's kind of free with your annual subscription. But there are also places where you don't have to join anything. You can go on Salem Now, you can go on Locals, and you can just pay and watch the movie. And so all these options are on the website vindicatingtrump.com. You can choose how you want to watch it. And these days, of course, with Rumble and also with a smart TV, basically, you can watch it on your big screen TV, and that's a cool way to watch it with friends and with family. I do want to mention that Salem is offering a really good deal on the DVDs. It's basically kind of a buy one, get one. And what I mean by that is if you buy Vindicating Trump, the new film, in DVD, they will throw in a free copy of my last film, Police State. We had a bunch of Police State DVDs, and so Salem came up with a great idea, which is by Vindicating Trump, we'll give you the other film. And if you haven't seen Police State, by the way, it's a superb film, and the two are a nice kind of back-to-back package. In fact, you could do a little bit of binge watching during the week or this coming weekend of those two films. So vindicatingtrump.com is the website that has all the details. Now, I want to talk about two very telling events, telling because of their symbolic importance. One involving Kamala Harris and one involving Donald Trump. With Trump, I'm going to be talking about his appearance at McDonald's, which I think is nothing short of iconic. Could in fact be one of those defining images of the whole campaign. I mean, if we think back to the campaign, I think the defining images are Trump's mugshot, which of course sort of preceded the campaign per se. Then the Trump raising his hand after the first assassination attempt, fight, fight, fight. That is maybe the most iconic of all. But, you know, Trump with an apron, not only making fries, but talking to the employees and then serving people and working the drive-through and I'll come to all that. But let me talk first about Kamala Harris, because she too had an iconic moment, but in a very different way. Kamala Harris is at a rally, and while she's at the rally, some people in the back of the audience begin to shout, "Jesus is Lord." And what's very interesting is Kamala Harris fires back. She fires back almost without thinking, instinctively. But this kind of instinctive response is always revealing, because very often it tells you what she really thinks. And what she says is, you're at the wrong rally. She says, you don't belong here, in effect. She says, go to the other rally, the smaller one down the street. And not only does she say that, telling in itself, but the audience begins to laugh and applaud, which tells me that the audience is kind of on board with what Kamala Harris is saying. And what is she saying? That's the point. I think she's actually drawing the line in the sand, or identifying the dividing line in this election. Because we tend to think of an election, it's all about the economy, two different views about taxation or about government benefits. No, this election is not just about the economy. It's not even just about the culture. It's not even just about moral issues. There's actually a spiritual line in the sand. And there are a lot of Christians who try to evade that. They're like, well, perhaps I should stay away. A pox on both your houses. But in a way, Kamala Harris is saying, you're wrong. Because, quite frankly, this is a divide between the Jesus is Lord people. They don't belong here. They belong on the other side, in the other rally. And the people who not only deny that Jesus is Lord, but deride and mock and laugh at people who think that Jesus is Lord, and tell those people, get out of here. You're basically in the wrong house of worship. Another way to put it is the Democratic Party itself is a sort of church. But it's not a church of Jesus, and it's not a church of God. I'll let you figure out what it's a church of. Given that there generally are sort of two options on the table here. It's like one of those multiple choice tests where you're like, it's God or it's the other guy. Well, it's not God, so who can it be? Kamala Harris is telling you the answer to that question, and I suggest we believe her. Now, let's turn to Trump, who is at McDonald's, and the left is having a complete fit about this. And, they've locked themselves so much into the idea that Trump is a bad guy, Trump is a dictator, that they are forced into a certain type of reasoning. Trump is a dictator, yet here he is with an apron at McDonald's. So that's just the kind of thing that dictators do. And I'm like, really? Are you saying that it is customary for dictators to show up like in did General Franco show up like in a waiter's uniform in a tapas bar in Spain in the 1930s and start serving people? Of course not. This is not dictatorial behavior, but for the left it is. For the left, if Trump does stand up, if he cracks a joke, well, that's a dark evocation of what Stalin used to do and Hitler and Mussolini. Now, I've watched some Hitler speeches, and I'm not very good in the original German, but it didn't seem to me like the audience was laughing uproariously or slapping. These weren't really knee slappers coming from Hitler. So the point is that the left is trapped in its own nonsense. Its premises are preposterous, and so they draw preposterous conclusions. In reality, this was kind of a genius move by Trump. And Trump has always been a marketing genius. I mean, I've talked before on the podcast about how it's Trump who created the Trump brand, not his dad. His father was kind of this introspective, quiet, brooding fellow, Fred Trump, very successful in real estate, to be sure, but not somebody who made the Trump brand a not just national, but international brand. Donald Trump did that. So Trump has an instinct for this kind of stuff. And so why does he go to McDonald's? Number one, because it is the best way to expose Kamala Harris's fraudulent claim, which was a stump line for her. She used to work at McDonald's. She's an ordinary person. She had a job at McDonald's just like everybody else, except, well, she didn't. She didn't. Now, any other Republican would be like, it has come to our attention that Kamala Harris never worked at McDonald's. Contrary to what she said, we demand an apology, blah, blah, blah. This is not Trump. Trump's point is, let me go work at McDonald's and I can then say I've worked at McDonald's for like 15 minutes longer than Kamala Harris. So in other words, I will use ridicule to expose the fact that, look, it's pathetic to lie about things you did, but I suppose for me, it is somewhat understandable. Sometimes people claim, well, I went to Harvard. It turns out, well, you didn't go to Harvard, but you went to Harvard like extension school. Or I was in charge of Merrill Lynch. Well, no, you were the deputy to the vice president. You weren't really running Merrill Lynch. But these exaggerations, although annoying, are somewhat believable. But who lies about, I used to work at McDonald's? It's crazy. Someone who lies about that could lie about anything. And that's the point. I think that's the point that Trump is trying to italicize. But the other thing about Trump, this is like the dual benefit of his McDonald's appearance, is it is a kind of touching sight to see a guy who's a billionaire not only put on the overalls, not only be instructed by some 20-something about how to make fries, but Trump shows a kind of genuine humility. All of this cuts against the idea that he's a megalomaniac, he's a bully. Trump is interacting in a very gentle way with people who are living the ordinary life and working at McDonald's. And then very tellingly, I don't know if you saw those scenes in social media of the people coming through the drive-thru and how they implore Trump, hey, I'm from Brazil, they've destroyed my country, please, we're counting on you not to let them destroy this country as well. Or the Indian guy, there was an Indian fellow who literally puts his hands together as if he's praying. He's obviously not praying to Trump, but he's imploring Trump, hey, Trump, help us to save the country, and by implication, the world. So all of this is just so powerful to watch. In fact, I was showing Debbie a couple of these clips, and Debbie was getting a little bit emotional because Debbie understands what it means to people who have been grown up in other societies to come here and see the way in which the United States is moving in the direction of failed and tyrannical societies, almost without paying attention to what is happening. Well, it's Trump that stands in between the emerging democratic police state. He's the one that stands to block it. He has the dimension, the power, the determination. He's obviously been its leading victim, so he knows what they're all about. And so this guy is the right guy for our time. I mean, that's in a nutshell the message of vindicating Trump. Trump may not be the best guy for any time, but he is the best guy. Well, not only the best guy, he may be the only guy for our time. There's a lot at stake, of course, in this upcoming election, but you know what? Regardless of who's sitting in the White House, the fuse on the economy has already been lit. 4 years of a conservative presidency will not be enough to turn the tide on our $35 trillion national debt. And if the left wins, well, it's like throwing gas on a dumpster fire. You don't have full control over the election's outcome, but guess what? You can diversify your savings now by investing in gold from Birch Gold, like Debbie and I have. For millennia, gold has stood firm in the face of greedy governments, economic upheavals, and global strife, and it can help protect you now. Birch Gold, my gold company, will help you convert an IRA of 401k into an IRA in physical gold, and the good news, it doesn't cost you a penny out of pocket. In the past 4 years, the buying power of the US dollar has declined. The price of gold has increased 40%. Coincidence? Well, I think not. Text Dinesh to 989898 to get started. You get a free information kit. No obligation, just information. Trust Birch Gold, as I do, to protect your savings. Text Dinesh to 989898 today. FDNY firefighter Daniel Foley assisted in rescue and recovery efforts at Ground Zero, but Daniel couldn't have known then that his heroism would cost him his life more than 18 years later. His death, like so many others, resulted from 9/11-related illnesses caused by the toxic dust that formed when the Twin Towers collapsed. Victims and first responders are still suffering and dying from 9/11. Yet here's the tragedy. Children in this nation are growing up unaware of America's darkest day. So, the Tunnel to Towers 9/11 Institute is helping educators teach children about 9/11. Tunnel to Towers 9/11 curriculum units have scripted lessons, background for teachers, and activities for students. They're based on first-person accounts and designed to meet academic standards. The 9/11 Institute offers the Discovering Heroes book series, a speakers bureau, a mobile exhibit with 9/11 artifacts, and memorial scholarships for the children of the Foundation's program recipients. You can help our nation keep its promise to never forget. Donate $11 a month to Tunnel to Towers at T2T.org. That's T, the number 2, T.org. Here we are, just 2 weeks and a day from Election Day. And how's it looking? You know, every time I do media hits, and I've been doing them 10, 12, 14 times a day, it's like, so Dinesh, what do you think? Who's gonna get across the finish line? And my answer is, I think it's going to be Trump. Now, there are last minute diversions. There is late October or even early November surprises. There is the risk of cheating of various sorts. So there's a lot of ways that this can go. But I think Trump has been looking really strong and Harris really bad. I think in a sense you could almost say that both of them are breaking out of the caricature. And what I mean by that is that there's been a kind of a monster caricature of Trump, and Trump has been showing, hey, I'm not that. I'm an ordinary fellow. I'm hilarious. I'm self-deprecating. I am chatty. I am a really nice guy. I'm not the combination of Mussolini and Stalin and Hitler that the left has preposterously portrayed me as. And similarly, you have another caricature. This is the lionizing caricature. This is the Kamala Harris as superheroine. And this has been falling apart, being refuted day by the real Kamala Harris, who is far from being a superheroine and is in fact an extremely vacant individual. I don't know if I've mentioned before, the T.S. Eliot, the poet, has the phrase, the hollow man. And what he really means is that you've got certain types of people, leaders, and they're just hollow. They're hollow in the sense that they're human facades. Everything that they do is a pose. There's actually nothing inside. It's not that they're bad. They're empty. And I think this is Kamala Harris. She's genuinely, intellectually, morally, an empty vessel. And she is let's not hide the fact, she is a ventriloquist dummy. But in this respect, she's like Biden. He's another kind of ventriloquist dummy. And probably, Biden probably started with a normal IQ, but he dropped to the sort of retarded level. Kamala Harris has always been at the retarded level. So the two of them have sort of met now. They are, in fact, this is why I think when Kamala Harris was asked, she's like, well, you didn't seem to object when Biden lost his mind. And Kamala should have replied, how could I object? I don't have a mind either. So the two of us are totally on the same wavelength. Well, anyway, Debbie's chuckling on the sidelines here about all this. I actually want to talk about the betting markets here because the betting markets are very interesting. They have been shown to be more predictive than polls. And I'm not just talking about who's going to win an election. Betting markets are pretty good on who's going to win the Super Bowl. And is the Dow Jones going to hit 45,000? And also other types of events. Will the hurricane cause certain types of damage, or will it go through Asheville, North Carolina? Things like that. You can bet these days. It's kind of silly, but you can bet on almost anything. And you can make money or lose money. And the way the betting markets work is they don't measure individuals. What they're measuring is dollars. So if you put $50 on Kamala Harris and I put $500 on Trump, my vote, so to speak, is going to count 10 times as much as yours. Why? Because I'm willing to put 10 times as much resources behind it. Well, the betting markets are showing that Trump is pulling away from Harris. And there's a very interesting post by Nate Silver, of all people. Nate Silver has been kind of a confirmed Democrat. In fact, he skirmished with us over 2,000 Mules. He had a critical article about it on his website, 538, I think it's called. And here's Nate Silver with 24 reasons that Trump could win. He's not saying that Trump is going to win, but he's giving reasons why he thinks Trump could win. Let's look at some of those reasons. 1, the Electoral College, he says, currently favors Trump. 2, inflation may be down somewhat, but it's hit a pretty high level, and voters are highly sensitive to inflation. 3, growth in take-home income has been sluggish now for years, hitting the working class. 4, parties in power, he says, have been doing really badly worldwide. So there's a populist thrust that we're beginning to see among electorates across the world. 5, Trump is a very effective populist, and he's able to play the populist card very effectively. 6, open borders and illegal immigration, and he says there's a backlash against that, not just in America, but also around the world. 7, Harris has run to the left, and because she's identified as such a leftist, it's very difficult for her to pivot back to the center and credibly claim that she's going to pursue centrist policies. 8, the culture, says Nate Silver, is moving to the right, and all the excesses of COVID, of crime, of wokeness are now actually coming to haunt the left. 9, voters remember the Trump years and by and large remember them pretty favorably. 10, Harris's grip on Black and Hispanic voters is slipping and slipping fast. Men in particular, he says, are in a kind of a rightward drift, and this is not just true of working class whites, but also working class Blacks and Hispanics. 12, the Democrats tried to lie about Biden's dementia, and voters remember this. They have reasonable concerns about it, and they now realize that they were right, and the media and the Democrats were lying to them. And on it goes. Trust in the media has fallen to abysmal levels. This means that despite the media's relentless effort to save Kamala Harris, it may not be enough. Harris is trying to tap the first woman president card. That didn't really work out for Hillary Clinton because she was very dislikable. And says Nate Silver, guess what? Harris isn't exactly much more likable than Hillary. And the Democrats have been trying the good old Trump is a dictator. Trump has no respect for the rule of law. Basically, Nate Silver says, you've overplayed this hand. People don't really believe it anymore. They don't even care that much about January 6th. Foreign policy. Nate Silver says the world has obviously become much more unstable and dangerous under Biden. There's been a rise of interstate conflict, deteriorating U.S. relations, humiliations in Afghanistan and elsewhere. And so all of this may not be the main factor why people vote for one candidate over another, but it is a factor. The Israel-Hamas war, says Nate Silver, has split the Democratic base. And it isn't just that it split the Democratic base, but Nate Silver goes, I can't think of another issue on the other side that has split the Republican base in the same way. Republicans to that degree are more united. Then, says Nate Silver, what about the Robert F. Kennedy Jr. factor, or more broadly, the third party factor? The third party factor in the past has sometimes favored Democrats, but in this case, says Nate Silver, I think it favors the Republicans, mainly because an icon of the Kennedy family, Robert F. Kennedy, but there's also Tulsi Gabbard, there's Elon Musk, there is Alan Dershowitz. So there's been a notable drift. Nicole Shanahan, who was Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s running mate, prominent Democrats who have bailed on the Democratic Party. The Elon Musk factor. Musk is doing everything he can. He's actually very active right now in the state of Pennsylvania. And, says Nate Silver, Musk has made it okay for Silicon Valley libertarians to vote for Trump. And so there have been a bunch of them now that have come over to Trump's side. And not only have they come over to Trump's side, they're more vocal. Now, of course, this group does not include Mark Zuckerberg, who's still doing censorship on Facebook. It does not include the people at Google. So it's not like the Democrats don't have some forces here. But the point is they had almost all these people in 2020, and they don't have them in 2024. And finally, says Nate Silver, Trump was nearly killed in 2 assassination attempts, and guess what? The way that this guy responded to those 2 attempts is nothing short of, well, legendary is my word, not Nate Silver's word. But Nate Silver is a guy who's been looking around, and he says, look, it's not one thing. It's a lot of things that seem to be coming together in favor of Trump and pushing against Harris. Again, he's very cautious to say, listen, he's not calling the election. He's not saying it's a done deal. But what he's saying is that for a lot of Democrats who believe that, oh, listen, well, you know what? We got Trump in 2020. We're going to get him again. Don't be so sure, says Nate Silver, because it's not quite the same this time around. We are officially in that time of the year where eating becomes way off-balanced. Parties, holidays, family gatherings always mean more snacks, more sweets, and generally indulging in all the wrong foods. Debbie isn't exactly tempted, but I am. And when your eating habits get off balance, so can you. And this is why I strongly recommend Balance of Nature daily supplements. This is what I'm talking about: fruits and veggies in a capsule. The Balance of Nature fruit and veggie supplements are sourced from whole fruit and vegetable ingredients, all the things you may be missing, all the things you need to make up for being off balance during this eating season. Make sure you're getting more of a variety of fruit and vegetable ingredients every step of the way with Balance of Nature. Start a trend toward better health today with my special startup offer. Whether you order online or call direct, you got to use promo code AMERICA and you get 35% off plus free shipping and a money-back guarantee. Here's the number to call: 800-246-8751. Again, it's 800-246-8751, or you can go to balanceofnature.com. When you use discount code AMERICA, you get it all: 35% off, free shipping, and a money-back guarantee. Are you feeling overwhelmed by the increasing cost of health insurance? Have you had enough of not having control over your healthcare dollars? Introducing Share Right. It's healthcare done the right way. At Share Right, you're not just a number, you're part of a caring community. And forget about paying excessive premiums. With Share Right, you stand to save 30 to 50% compared to health insurance. Think about what you could do with all those savings. But it's more than just savings. Share Right ensures you have access to the care you deserve precisely when you need it, from routine checkups to unexpected emergencies. With Share Right, your health care is their top priority. Empower yourself today. Take control of your healthcare costs. Visit shareright.org/Dinesh to learn more. See how much you can save. Visit shareright.org/Dinesh. That's shareright.org/Dinesh for healthcare done the right way. Guys, always happy to welcome back to the podcast Josh Hammer, senior editor of Newsweek. He also hosts the Josh Hammer Show podcast and syndicated radio show. He writes a weekly newsletter, the Josh Hammer Report. New forthcoming book, Israel and Civilization, The Fate of the Jewish Nation and the Destiny of the West. Follow him on X at Josh_Hammer. Josh, thanks for joining me. I appreciate it. Do you agree with me that the death of this guy Sinwar, the head of Hamas, represents a major shift and indeed a major victory, a major turning point in Israel's war to end the terroristic forces that are threatening the Jewish state?
Well, Dinesh, always a pleasure to join you. So the death of Yahya Sinwar is a massive development, an absolutely massive development in this now year-plus long war against Hamas. It is one of the two largest eliminations of any Hamas militant since this war began, the other being Ismail Haniyeh, who met his fate actually deep in the bowels of Tehran. He was visiting Tehran back in July, Haniyeh was, where he was actually taken out at an Islamic Revolutionary Guard like their actual compound. And the details are still a little mysterious to this day. It's not clear exactly how that happened, but Sinwar, we know how it happened. He had a lot of cash on him. He had passports on him. All indications were that he was trying to flee. It looked like he was going to flee. And the IDF basically found him just in time. Look, Sinwar was the number one mastermind of the October 7th massacre. He was the number one person who was behind that. Now, you might say that Iran really is above that. They were really kind of controlling the tentacles. And that's true to a large extent. Ultimately, the head of the snake in the region is Iran. They really are the wellspring of pretty much all of the evil that we see there, especially when it comes to Hezbollah. And Hassan Nasrallah has also, of course, met his maker as well. But Sinwar, along with Nasrallah, I mean, these are big-time jihadists that Israel has taken out now over about a 1 month span, going back. Hassan Nasrallah in Beirut, Lebanon, was less than a month ago. And I think the key points for the audience here, Dinesh, is none of this would have happened Bibi and the IDF, they would not have gotten Sinwar if they had listened to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, if they had listened to the United Nations, if they had listened to the European Union. Frankly, if they had listened to their own domestic opposition, the Israeli left itself. Because for a very, very long time, going back at least as far as February, March of this year, people on the left in America and Europe and Israel all throughout have been saying, don't go into Rafah. What are you doing? There's nothing in Rafah. And what Netanyahu and his government said all along was, what are you talking about? This is the southernmost stronghold for Hamas in Gaza. It's right there on the border with Egypt. And we have reason to believe that, one, hostages are still being held there, and two, that large swaths of Hamas leadership are there. So Bibi Netanyahu has basically stuck his two middle fingers to the global left, the Israeli left, the European left, the American left, and decided to go into Rafah. And where did they find Sinwar? They found him in Rafah, just like Bibi Netanyahu said that they would find him there all along. So it is a huge coup for the IDF, for, frankly, Prime Minister Netanyahu himself. And it is a massive symbolic victory, certainly, over the one, again, who masterminded the October 7th massacre. It should, in theory, make Hamas more willing to come to the table when it comes to some sort of hostage deal. Of course, that remains to be seen. We're dealing here with fanatical zealots, the 72 virgins in heaven and all that there. So, cold calculations sometimes go out the window. But in theory, that is what you might expect to see happen next.
And do you think, Josh, that this is a turning point in a sense for Netanyahu himself? He has been a pretty controversial figure. There have been great divisions in Israeli society about his policies on the Supreme Court and some of his other policies. It seems like the October 7th attack refocused attention on the terrorist threat. But even then, there was a question. I remember reading stuff, well, Netanyahu's in it for himself. We wish that there was a different leader. But it seems like regardless of what you think of Netanyahu on so many other fronts, this guy has come through with flying colors in terms of prosecuting the war, being the sort of Churchillian figure that Israel needs to pave the way to victory.
Dinesh, I was a second-year law student back in 2015, back when Prime Minister Netanyahu gave his speech before the joint session of Congress opposing Barack Obama's horrific Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA. And I watched that speech from my apartment in Chicago, and I immediately ran to my computer to fire out a blog post where I called Bibi Netanyahu the Winston Churchill of our time. That really is the figure that he has been for a while now. Now, he is not perfect. Winston Churchill was not perfect either, by the way. I mean, no historical figure is perfect at all. But Netanyahu is a brave, fearless leader who is willing to look into the abyss when it comes to staring evil in the face and to take a clear-headed approach no matter what the naysayers across the world will say to him. What he has done over the past year in dealing not just with all of the internal chaos. Israel's a very frenetic country. There are a lot of political parties, the judiciary, the deep state. They are extremely hostile. Even the military, the high-ranking IDF brass, controlled by the left, the same way that the United States military tragically is controlled by the left as well. A lot of similarities there. So not just domestically, but when it comes to the global stage, Dinesh, I don't think that we here in America can even contemplate the kind of pressure that he has been dealing with behind the scenes when it comes to people like Lloyd Austin, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State. I honestly cannot even begin to imagine the kind of attempting of the twisting of the screws and all the various types of levers of pressure that the United States and the European Union, the UN, have been trying to apply on him over this past year. So for him to buckle down and to see this job through, again, the job is not fully done yet, but they're getting close. The point is that back when Israel was on the precipice of going into Rafah, there was this whole debate. Are they going to go into Rafah there? Netanyahu said we have to do it because we need total victory. That was his verbiage, very Churchillian verbiage, by the way, very similar to what Churchill and Eisenhower said before the D-Day invasion in June of 1944. So when Netanyahu said total victory, Israel is now on their way towards that. They finally have decided to basically put on their blinders and ignore what the naysayers say. That has resulted in the deaths in less than a month, as we were just saying, of arch jihadists like Hassan Nasrallah, Yahweh Sinwar. These are people with horrific amounts of blood on their hands. American citizens, too, by the way. Many Americans have tragically been killed by both of these individuals. And again, this is one of the theses of my forthcoming book, Israel and Civilization. What Israel is currently doing right now is they are really fighting a war, yes, for their own national interest, but they're really fighting a war that has massive positive externalities for Western civilization at large. And all Israel asks in return is to not be thrown under the bus, provide a little diplomatic cover at the United Nations from the jackals of the UN when need be. But other than that, just let them do their job. That, frankly, is all they ask. And surely, Dinesh, that's really not too much to ask for.
I mean, here you're making a key point, because there is a wing, and I don't think it's a very big wing in the United States, that equates the situation in Israel with the war in Ukraine, and seems to think that somehow America has to make a consistent decision to sort of either be involved full on or to be disengaged and deal with our own problems. I think what you're saying is the two situations are, at least I think you're implying, the two situations are not similar at all. The United States has been committing massive resources in Ukraine, a country even more distant from us than Vietnam. We have a different set of interests in the Middle East, and specifically in Israel. Israel is not asking us to commit troops. The Israeli soldiers are doing the fighting. They're willing to finish the job. What they're actually asking for is remarkably little, and even that little the Biden-Harris administration is begrudging them.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. So there's one vile, typically anti-Semitic talking point that I probably should just briefly debunk here. There is this long-standing talking point on the left and certain elements, frankly, of the right historically as well, which basically says that Israel, the Jews, Tel Aviv, that they ask America to fight their wars for them. And this is just total nonsense. It has never been true for a second. Frankly, Dinesh, for my book, I actually went back to the 2002 Iraq War and invasion debate and got in the weeds a little bit there. The Israeli right, even the more hawkish elements of the right, were actually very divided on whether or not this would be a good idea for the Bush administration to go into Iraq. Ariel Sharon, before he lost his marbles with the Gaza withdrawal, he was still basically the head of the Israeli right at that time in 2002. He called up Condoleezza Rice and Colin Powell and all the others in the Bush administration and said, from our perspective, this is a bad idea. Don't do this, because one, you're missing the forest for the trees when it comes to the real threat, which is Iran. Second, just as importantly, if you're going to start toppling dictators here, who knows what could come next? And, tragically, here we are 20 years later, and Iraq is basically just an Iranian satrapy at this point. But more generally, it has always been Israeli doctrine. I mean, Dinesh, the entire purpose of Zionism, which is this word that's gotten besmirched, it's actually a beautiful concept. It literally just means Jewish sovereignty in the Jews' ancient, ancestral, biblical homeland. The entire point of Zionism, Jewish nationalism, is that the Jews fight on their own behalf to control their own destiny. The notion of trying to call in foreign troops is not just immoral, it is antithetical to the entire idea of Zionism. It has never, ever, ever for a second been Israeli policies there. So no, in the current context, Israel is definitely not asking for Americans, God forbid, to go die there. But I should note that on October 7th, you did have 30 to 40 Americans who were either killed or taken hostage, which is a militarily important thing to point out. In fact, October 7, 2023, on its own terms, was actually the largest American hostage crisis since 1979 in Tehran, the Jimmy Carter hostage crisis when the mullahs took over. So there is a United States interest there. At a maximum, what that looks like is maybe tier 1 hostage evacuation specialists on the ground. No one is asking for people in camo Marines to get in there with M16s. Total nonsense. No one is asking for that. And just really brief on the comparison to the Ukrainian-Russia front. Look, I myself have actually been a skeptic, a major skeptic, that is, of the United States' approach to the war in Ukraine for 2.5 years now. The key thing for any foreign policy conflict around the world, from my perspective, is how does this actually implicate the American national interest? That is essentially the singular prism through which I view foreign policy. It is a realistic, pragmatic, sober approach to foreign policy. It is not ideologically neoconservative. It is not ideologically isolationist. It is ad hoc, case-by-case assessment there. The case-by-case assessment in Israel, as I just alluded to, with 30 to 40 Americans taken hostage or slaughtered, there is a clear, compelling American interest here to see the Iranian regime put down, to see Hezbollah severely taken out in Lebanon, Hamas. These things don't just affect the Israeli national interest. They affect, frankly, all of Western civilization, but the United States' national interest as well is directly affected here.
When we come back, Josh, I want to ask you about whether Netanyahu at this point has a very big decision to make, namely to seize the window of opportunity and maybe take the battle directly to the Iranian mullahs. We'll be right back. Mike Lindell is such a great guy, and he has a heart of gold. Mike and MyPillow love giving back to those in need. They sent a truckload of 14,000 MyPillows to those impacted by Hurricane Helene. But, even though Mike loves to give back, a large retail store just canceled a huge order that had already left the warehouse. And so Mike is like, hey, besides giving to people in need, I want to pass some savings directly on to you. And for the first time ever, you can get a standard classic MyPillow for wholesale prices, just $14.88. It gets better. For a limited time, they're offering their entire classic collection at wholesale prices. Get queen-size MyPillows, $18.88. Upgrade to a king for only $1 more. Get the body pillows for $29.88. The multi-use MyPillows, just $9.88. Here's the number to call, 800-876-0227, or you can go to mypillow.com. When you use promo code Dinesh, you can take advantage of wholesale pricing for the first time ever. On top of that, get free shipping on orders over $75. This kind of offer has never been offered this low before. Again, go to mypillow.com, use promo code Dinesh, get the standard MyPillow for just $14.88, the lowest price ever. There are limited quantities at this price, and once they're gone, they're gone. I'm back with Josh Hammer, senior editor-at-large at Newsweek and also author of the forthcoming book, Israel and Civilization, The Fate of the Jewish Nation and the Destiny of the West. Josh, where is Netanyahu now? What needs to be done to complete this operation if, as you say, the head of the snake is in Tehran and ultimately the shots are being called by the mullahs? Isn't it true that in some way you have to either go after the Iranians directly, or if not, draw them directly or through their surrogates to a negotiating table where you basically say, here's the deal, there's no way you're going to win this thing, and you better make some concessions here that allow us to, well, at the very least, leave us alone to build our own society as we wish?
I think that's basically right, Dinesh. I mean, none of this, unfortunately, is going to truly stop until the Iranian regime. Look, I hate to use the rhetoric of regime change because that's become something of a toxic verbiage, a toxic rhetoric in American foreign policy. But this regime fundamentally is evil. I mean, Dinesh, just for the viewers' understanding here, I was talking about all of this Israel, Middle East foreign policy for YAF, Young America's Foundation in Washington, D.C. at their national college conference in July. And a student came up to me from the back of the classroom after my talk. He was born and raised in Tehran. He lived there until he was 16 years old. He told me that in their schools in Tehran, their version of the Pledge of Allegiance, here in the United States, at least when I was in elementary school, we would pledge allegiance to the flag. Their version in Tehran was that they would solemnly vow to do all which they could to destroy the little the little Satan of Israel and the big Satan of the United States. They would actually, that was their version of the Pledge of Allegiance. So this regime is evil. I mean, ever since the initial hostage crisis, they have had American blood on their hands, hundreds, if not thousands, slain with the IEDs in Iraq there. So at some point, they really probably do have to go. Now, my stance is that it is not the best way to do that, to just go in and start dropping bombs on Tehran. That is not my stance. That has never been my stance. I think the Trump administration basically got it right. When it came to Donald Trump, when it came to Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, when it came to this maximum pressure strategy to diplomatically isolate them, to slap the most severe sanctions possible on their oil exports, which are the mother's milk of that regime. By the way, the Biden-Harris administration took off most of those oil sanctions. That is how Iran has been able to fund a lot of this jihadism all throughout the Middle East. Hezbollah, Houthis, Hamas, all of these horrific actors, these massacres. In fact, it's difficult to play counterfactual history, but it's entirely possible that October 7th never would have happened had the Biden-Harris administration kept the sanctions on the regime that the Trump administration put in place. Again, impossible to know, but it actually is entirely possible. So that basically is the way ultimately in the mid to long term that I think this thing comes to something of a resolution. Now, look, from Netanyahu's perspective right now, he's between a rock and a hard place because you have this imminently forthcoming American presidential election. I don't think it's an earth-shattering revelation to say that he hopes that Donald Trump prevails. I also think that Donald Trump is in good shape to win this election for whatever it's worth. But he does have to face the possibility that Kamala Harris could be president. And does he want to go strike the Iranian nuclear facilities right now, where it seems like it is democratic foreign policy that they want Iran to have nuclear facilities? By the way, that goes against what Democrats have said for 20 years. Nonetheless, we know now by their actions that they clearly do support the Iranian nuclear program. So I don't know exactly what he is going to do or whether he's going to do it before the election at this point. I personally think that this is the moment that Netanyahu has been waiting for his entire career. He has been talking about Iran for his entire career. It is Israel's #1 existential threat. I personally think that if he does not make a play at some of the nuclear facilities right now, then he has missed a once in a lifetime potentially opportunity. But again, as we were saying a few minutes ago, the guy is dealing with so much pressure behind closed doors. I just can't even imagine what he's dealing with.
And isn't it true? I mean, if I just put a little broader perspective on this, you come to understand how a blunder that is made even a long time ago can reverberate across half a century. I mean, let's think for a moment here about Islamic radicalism, right? The Muslim Brotherhood, founded around 1928 by Hassan al-Banna in Egypt. And you had a ragtag group of these terrorist organizations, but radical Islam did not have control of a major state. But in 1979, thanks to Jimmy Carter, who essentially opposed the Shah because he was a bad guy, and then pulls the Persian rug out from under the Shah, and we get Khomeini. And now that revolution has consolidated itself. It is much more difficult to uproot. A whole generation of Iranians who are 50 years old have been living in the revolutionary society. They don't know anything else. And so to attempt to transform a regime like that now is just infinitely more difficult than it would have been to handle it correctly at the outset from the beginning. So it seems to me a good lesson for Americans today when we look at foreign policy. We go, oh, that was a blunder in Afghanistan, but it's probably no big deal. Yes, it is a big deal, and very often your country and other countries are paying the price for it, not just years, but decades later.
I think that's very, very well said. Here is one silver lining. I've said a lot of bad things about the Middle East here. Here is one silver lining. The silver lining is that Iran really is the threat, not just to Israel, but frankly to America, to the West in the region right now. This was not always the case. A plurality, if not outright majority, of the 9/11 hijackers were actually Saudi nationals. Back in the day, Saudi Arabia was probably the world's single largest funder of radical Wahhabist, Sunni fanatical clerics and madrasas all throughout the world there. But it really is Iran right now. Qatar is an issue because they fund the Muslim Brotherhood, as you just said. But Qatar is ultimately a tiny country with very, very little military clout. They can be dealt with if the West sobers up a little bit. The threat is really coming from one country. And the fact that it's coming from this one country, the Islamic Republic of Iran, has actually resulted, at least during the Trump administration, in historical peace, because you saw the Bahrainis, the Emiratis, the Moroccans, the Sudanese coming to peace with Israel to form this Abraham Accords Iranian containment alliance. By the way, the Saudis clearly were on board with that. Essentially, what the Saudis did was Mohammed bin Salman, the precocious crown prince, basically gave his imprimatur of legitimacy to the Emiratis and basically said to the UAE and Bahrain, okay, you guys go be the guinea pig with this experiment. Let's see how it works. I personally feel relatively confident that if Trump, God willing, gets a second term, then the Saudis will formally join that circle of peace, probably fairly early on, if I had to guess, in a second Trump term there. So the silver lining is that you're seeing a very different Middle East, where the Saudis, Emiratis, Bahrainis, they represent the future. Iran represents this fanatical, zealous past. And that is something I think of a bit of solace here, is that they truly, earnestly do not represent the future of the region. Now, they have to be dealt with there, but they are one country ultimately, and God willing, some way, somehow, we will find, all of us that is in the West will find a way to deal with it.
Josh, let's talk about what Kamala Harris did very recently at a rally. I don't know if you saw the clip on social media, but there's a pro-Palestinian activist who is pressing her and starts talking about the Israeli genocide. Now, this is an inconvenient topic for Kamala Harris. She somehow gets the guy ejected from the conversation. However, the moment that he leaves the room, she basically says, you know what? The guy was right. She implies, if not outright states, that Israel has in fact been committing genocide. I think the guy was going on about 19,000 children. And Kamala Harris, it seems, in principle agrees, even if she disputed his tone or was this the right place to bring this up. Nevertheless, she, I think, is the first person of that stature on record as essentially accusing the Israeli government of mass genocide. Are you familiar with this, and what's your take on it?
So I did see this clip, and it's appalling. I mean, what can you possibly say other than that it's truly appalling? I mean, it reminds me of Joe Biden in all of his senility speaking in Chicago at the Democratic National Convention, saying that the protesters, by which we mean the terrorists supporting Hamas supporters, Hezbollah supporters marching in Chicago, when Joe Biden said that they, quote, have a point. This is Kamala Harris's they have a point moment here. Look, the Democrats have been trying to have it both ways on this conflict ever since the conflict got started, because on the one hand, the American people, thank goodness, still by a very large margin side with Israel. And for that matter, there are a plurality, if not majority, of elderly Democrats. Democrats call it over the age of 50, those who have memories of the Bill Clinton era. Those Democrats still, by and large, side with Israel more than the Palestinian Arabs. But this younger generation of leftist activists, of progressives, whatever you want to call them, are totally in the tank for the Palestinian Arab cause for all sorts of various reasons that are perhaps a little bit beyond the confines of our conversation today. And she's been trying to have it both ways on this issue because of that for a while, to try to keep this Humpty Dumpty coalition together. But she can't actually have it both ways, because some foreign policy conflicts actually really are a zero-sum game. And the broader Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been a zero-sum game for about 100 years now. I mean, ever since the old Grand Mufti of Jerusalem massacred Jews in Hebron in 1928, ever since he visited Hitler in Berlin during World War II, the Palestinian Arabs have been trying to genocide the Jews of Israel for a century. Israel has done everything possible to try to reach some sort of settlement. There have been more two-state offers than I could possibly rattle off here, and every single time it is rejected because they truly believe, as the radicals marching in the streets now candidly will say, from the river to the sea, they actually want a second Holocaust, and they will not stop short of that. For Kamala Harris to indulge the notion that these people that desire this have a point or whatnot there is nothing less than shocking. It should truly rattle the conscience of any voter who is still deciding at this late stage which ticket to cast their ballot for.
Guys, I've been talking to Josh Hammer, senior editor-at-large of Newsweek. Look for the forthcoming book, Israel and Civilization, The Fate of the Jewish Nation and the Destiny of the West. Thank you very much, Josh Hammer.
Thanks so much, Dinesh.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and SalemNow.com.